This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. After experiencing trauma, I went to therapy, and my therapist guided me through a difficult time in my life. They helped me understand what was happening and provided me with tools to cope and find my own strength and resilience. Their experience and compassion were invaluable and enabled me to rebuild my life and move forward. I strongly believe in the power of therapy to help people through difficult times. BetterHelp connects you with a licensed therapist who is trained to listen and give you helpful, unbiased advice. First, you go to their site. You can use my link, betterhelp.com/resilience. You answer a few questions, and BetterHelp will match you to a professional who has years of experience helping people with struggles just like yours. Let BetterHelp connect you to a therapist who can support you, all from the comfort of your own home. Visit betterhelp.com/resilience or choose podcast, then Notes on Resilience during sign up and enjoy a special discount on your first month.
No one is voiceless, but too many people are unheard. And so I've really made it a point to use the power of my pen as a lawmaker, to use the power of my letterhead, to use the power of my platform, the power of convening, the power of the movement, the power of the purse, to lift up every voice.
Welcome to Notes on Resilience. I'm your host, Manya Chilinsky. This is our first episode in a new series, Advocating for Resilience, Empowering Mental Wellness. And our guest for this episode is Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley. She represents the Massachusetts 7th. She's a former city councilor for the city of Boston, and she focuses on listening to the people who are closest to the pain. And she's an incredible advocate for her constituents and for all of us. And we can learn a lot about advocacy from listening to her. Enjoy the episode. Listen to Notes on Resilience on Apple Podcasts and subscribe. And we'd love for you to leave a review too. And hey, I'm really curious. Would you recommend this show to a friend? If not, would you be willing to let me know why? Send me an email right now and tell me what's stopping you from recommending Notes on Resilience to your friends. What can I do to make this the kind of show you would recommend to your friends? I want to make a show that people really enjoy and brings value to their lives. You can email me at manya@manyachilinsky.com or fill out the form in the show notes. Thanks. Congresswoman Pressley, or Ayanna, how are you today?
I'm doing well. I'm so grateful that you've created this platform, and I'm excited to be with you today.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm excited to be with you. And before we dive into the topic of the day, one question I ask all my guests is, if you could have dinner with any historical figure, who would it be and why?
You know, that's tough. Okay, I'm going to do what most elected officials do, which is answer the question I want to answer, Manya. So I'm gonna actually just do like three people. So because a historic figure to me is my mom. And my mother transitioned after a long battle with leukemia 12 years ago. But as anyone can attest to, losing a parent and certainly a mother, and I'm an only child, it is a permanent heartbreak. So she to me is a historic figure. And not only for the role she played in community, but certainly for the formidable way in which she shaped me. So I would love to have dinner with my mom, just one more time. But in terms of like conventional historic figures, it would be Maya Angelou.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Dr. Maya Angelou. And the reason why is because as a child who experienced a fair amount of adverse childhood experiences and trauma, specifically intrafamily childhood sexual abuse. When I read I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, it's the first time that I knew I wasn't alone in the world. So it is not in any way, hyperbole, or I'm not being dramatic to say that book and the words of Maya Angelou saved my life. And I've just always had this kinship with her. I love poetry. Whenever I need anchoring, when I need clarity, when I need healing, I read her poetry. For many years, I hosted a poetry slam in her honor on her birthday, April 4th. And then finally, I had the distinct privilege of meeting her once when I was a producer for one of the Democratic National Conventions. And I outreached to her to be a part of one of my segments, and she agreed. And I asked her to autograph something for me and to pen a note. And she only wrote 3 letters, one word, and it was the word joy. And I thought about this woman, this incredible orator. Her presidential inauguration poem, On the Pulse of Morning, is also one of my favorites. And I said, here's this great orator, this wordsmith, this author, and she could have written anything. And she just wrote the words joy with an exclamation point. And so that has really set me on my own path, and why I'm so intentional about informing joy in my policy work and in my life.
Wow. Wow, that's so amazing that you got a chance to meet her in real life while she was still with us. And
Mm-hmm.
your story is such a testament to the power of feeling seen for the first time.
Yes. Yeah. You know, it's my hope that that is what I accomplish in my work
Mm-hmm.
as a lawmaker, as someone representing multiple marginalized identities. So often I'm humbled by an award or something. And I always will tell the audience that it is humbling that they see me, but it's more important to me that they know, trust, and believe that I see them, because I
Yes.
truly know the power of that.
Yes. Well, speaking as a former constituent of yours and wishes that I still was a constituent, I can attest to feeling seen through you and your work and your amazing team.
Thank you, Manya. And by the way, you're my constituent for life. I'm never letting you go. So
Okay.
I'm
Thank
always
you.
going to claim you. So you have to claim me too.
I will absolutely claim you. That means the world to me. Well, we're here today to talk about advocacy and advocating for mental wellness in particular, and, the importance of advocates like yourself and like the rest of us who call your office looking for help in promoting mental wellness and resiliency.
Mhm.
So, just to get us started, can you just give us a quick overview, because I know there's a lot to it, but of your personal journey to become an advocate?
Well, I'll try to give the abridged version here. You know, I do believe that the people closest to the pain should be the closest to the power,
Mhm.
driving and informing the policymaking. My family is certainly not an anomaly because of systemic multi-generational trauma that is perpetuated in so many of our families.
Mhm.
And so I grew up being raised by a mother who fought fiercely to ensure that I would not be denied or deprived of any opportunity. However, my mother had many untreated traumas.
Mhm.
She was a survivor of sexual assaults, domestic violence, the cumulative impact of racism, sexism, microaggressions, and certainly the trauma of the destabilization of my father's substance use disorder and his subsequent incarceration. So
Mhm.
there were many societal factors that I believe that were created by policy, by scarcity budgets and policy violence, that perpetuated violence in our family and in our community. And the more I studied the root causes, the more I came to appreciate the power of policy in creating those depressed dynamics
Mhm.
within a household and in a community. And so I ran for the Boston City Council and was elected, becoming the first woman of color, first Black woman to serve on that body. Only took 100 years.
Yeah.
And I created a committee, which still exists today, which was replicated by several other municipalities in the country, called the Committee on Healthy Women, Families, and Communities.
Mhm.
And it was the first standing policy committee to name the issue of trauma.
Yeah.
And the purpose of the committee, many people, when they thought about health, they made it just about the delivery of healthcare services.
Mhm.
And I created this committee to underscore that the individual, the family, and the community are inextricably linked. And what happens to one adversity should be the business of all of us.
Mhm.
And so it was in doing that committee work, I convened some 7 hearings on trauma and the many ways in which it manifests: community-based trauma, domestic violence, sexual assault, the marathon bombing. One of the most powerful hearings that I did in that time was a hearing called Family Voices,
Mhm.
where we heard from some 300 families impacted by gun violence. And it was a listening only hearing, which is not a customary procedure in any governing body. Usually, community comes to testify, and then experts and elected officials counter to whatever
Mhm.
you offer. Sometimes they try to talk people out of their own experiences,
Yes.
which is why I wanted to be a listening only hearing. And so for some 4 hours, we listened to these 300 plus families directly impacted by gun violence and just had to actively listen and take it in. And I had a number of policy recommendations to come out of that hearing. So
Yeah.
my work on trauma really began based in my own lived experiences. Again, as a survivor of sexual abuse, of campus sexual assault, someone who has experienced clinical depression, suicide ideation. These are all things that I lived with. And then I took that lived experience and championed mental health and wellness and well being in my role in the city council and now in Congress. That through line continues. In fact, on the Oversight and Reform Committee, I convened the first ever hearing on childhood trauma. So that work continues to show up. I have a trauma informed legislative agenda, and I
Mhm.
think I was the only city councilor to have an aide dedicated to that work, and
Mhm.
that has remained true in my time in Congress as well.
Yes. That is so important. I'm glad you brought up the term trauma informed. And, one of the reasons that I picked up the phone and called your office is because I knew about the work you had done in the city and as a congresswoman on the concept of trauma. I knew that that was something that was important to you and that you would hear me when I said, this is what's going on. Can you help? So, as a congresswoman, you play a really important role in shaping mental health and trauma related policies and legislation. So, how do you approach advocacy efforts that come to you from constituents or from advocacy groups?
Well, as I said, I believe the people closest to the pain should be the closest to the power, driving and informing the policy making. And
Mhm.
so I seek to practice something I characterize as cooperative governing.
Mhm.
And so I don't write a bill, I don't co sponsor a bill, I don't cast a vote on a bill without conferring with those most proximate to an issue.
Mhm.
And by being proximate, one, it keeps me honest and uncomfortable, so I never grow complacent.
Mhm.
It allows me to have a vantage point to understand the intersectionalities, the complexities and nuance of that issue, but also to harness and cultivate the best solutions. And I think, our relationship and our cooperative governing is one such example, where by your outreach to our office, it really shows the power of one, especially if you have an organizational culture that is committed to actively listening to constituents, reading every email, every correspondence, and then working together to figure out how best we can tackle that. My job is to problem solve, is to lighten the load, to alleviate hardship. So it's cooperative governing, and that does mean, sometimes 5 more meetings and 20 more phone calls and,
Yes.
100 more emails. But I think in the end, the outcomes are changed and improved over time through the process of cooperative governing. Again, now on the federal level, every issue that I've done in the trauma space has been one that has been approached in that way, whether it's the post disaster Mental Health Act. Again, I'm so grateful, to you for reaching out to my office. And that over that 2 year period, we were able to put something together that ultimately was signed into law. I just hit my 5 year milestone in Congress, and I'm asked often about those things that I'm proudest of in the last 5 years. And our bill, and I really do consider it to be our bill, being signed into law by President Biden is one of the things that I'm proudest of. Along with that, Committee on Oversight Reform, first time hearing on childhood trauma. And then more recently, in my role as the policy co-chair for the Democratic Women's Caucus, we convened a very powerful hearing on mental health in girls, which we know all of those numbers around anxiety, depression, suicide ideation have only been compounded by the impacts of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
Which, as we started to do the work of recovery, I continue to advocate for a White House summit on community-based responses to trauma. I did, from the beginning, believe that trauma would be the second pandemic. I believe we're still very much in it, and that our recovery can't just be focused on an economic one. It has to include a psychological one as well. And so we did a hearing that was a shadow hearing, is what it's called, because the Democrats are not in the majority. So when we do a hearing, since we can't control the hearing schedule, it's called a shadow hearing. So we convened one of those, and that was very powerful. And then more recently, just as of last week, I was a part of a hearing on the role of artificial intelligence and the ways in which it is creating very harmful content targeted towards girls. So,
Wow. I'm glad to hear that you're working on that. And that's so important for our girls and all the young people to
yes.
be sort of trying to stop the cycle earlier on in the process if we can. What are the unique challenges or strategies when you're advocating for a topic like trauma or mental health issues?
When I first was elected, I often said I wanted to be a voice for the voiceless. But now at the ripe old age of 50, I know better than to say such a thing. No one is voiceless, but too many people are unheard. And so I've really made it a point to use the power of my pen as a lawmaker, to use the power of my letterhead, to use the power of my platform, the power of convening, the power of the movement, the power of the purse, to lift up every voice. And that includes those who have experienced trauma psychologically, physically, sexually, domestically, being robbed of a loved one due to community-based violence, or experiencing neglect, and much, much more. So there are so many different forms of trauma. And for some, it is more acutely presenting, and for others, it's more latent. We certainly see that in our schools. And that's why, since my time on the city council, I've advocated for a trauma-informed learning environment and for those socio-emotional wellness supports. A traumatized child certainly has a compromised readiness to learn.
Mm-hmm.
Poverty is traumatic, food insecurity is traumatic, community-based violence, domestic violence, displacement, being unhoused. All of those things are traumatic. Our kids are increasingly carrying so much trauma in their backpacks as they cross the thresholds into our learning communities every day. So in terms of strategies, it's just about the understanding that there isn't a one size fits all approach.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's about curating a response to each of those various traumas and making sure that those services are accessible and available to everyone, and that it is not limited or dictated by race, income, or zip code.
Mm-hmm.
So I learned how best to support those in their healing by cooperatively governing, by actively listening to those closest to the pain.
Right. Absolutely. Wow. So your job in Congress is to navigate for your constituents in the Massachusetts 7th, but you are creating laws for everyone.
Right.
Are those two different ways of thinking or just two pieces of the same cloth?
Yeah, I think they're two pieces of the same cloth. I mean, first and foremost, representing the Massachusetts 7th Congressional District, a district that is vibrant, diverse, dynamic, one of the most unequal in the country, and arguably one of the more progressive. I see our district, the district rather, since you're no longer my constituent officially, but I see the district as an incredible, petri dish, if you will, to pilot things and to scale them up and take them other places. So,
Mm-hmm.
I do also bring that micro lens and approach, particularly having served on the municipal level, but on the federal level now, looking at these things in the macro and understanding the role that federal policy has played in creating a number of inequities and disparities and injustices, I do see it as two pieces of the same cloth. And so the marathon bombing is something that happened in our district, and your overture to our office was about you, but it wasn't just about you, right? And so now that Post-Disaster Mental Health Response Act is law. And survivors of natural disasters or terrorist attacks like the Boston Marathon bombing, who are often left with grappling, lasting trauma that impacts their mental health, and most of them, can't access critical mental health services offered by the federal government because of you, Manya. The Post-Disaster Mental Health Response Act, signed into law by President Biden, expands that eligibility. So survivors of various types of disasters can access the mental health supports and services, the psychological first aid that they need. And so if you had not brought to our attention that loophole, regarding an emergency declaration, and I don't want to get too wonky here. I'll leave that to you, Manya, but I just want your audience to know, again, the power of one. That's why it is two pieces of the same cloth, in terms of my representing the district, but also recognizing those things that can serve and be to the benefit of a nation. And that is certainly true for legislation that was only made possible because you emailed our office.
Well, thank you for saying that. And, as you were saying that, I am so proud and so amazed about the work that we did together. But I will tell you that as an advocate, it is still a little difficult for me to get my head around the fact that you and your team and I made this change that's impacting hundreds, if not thousands of people going forward into the future. How do you get your head around all of the good things that you're doing for Massachusetts and the country?
I don't. Honestly, I have I call my team the A team, which is for Ayanna, my first name spelled with an A, but I think it's also because we're very type A, very driven. And it's something I'm constantly reminding my team to lift your head up, and take stock and sort of a collective audit of the impact we're having on the good work we have done. But we actually don't pause very often because there are so many challenges and so many people depending on us to stand in the gap. And when you're governing in the current climate we are in now, oftentimes your greatest victory is not what you advance, but it's what you stop from happening. And so we have to be both in a defensive and offensive position. So I'm very humbled to be in a position to do this work every day. I don't really give myself that many days off, mentally or otherwise, because those that seek to create harm, they're certainly not taking any days off. So, I'm very motivated, very compelled, and I feel a radical love for the human family, and because of that, a radical sense of responsibility. But Mani, I will say that I do very much push mental health and well-being within my organization. Something that I keep turning over in my mind for first responders, for political staff, for social workers, for healthcare personnel, for anyone doing the work of healing, is how do we heal the healers?
Yes.
And, just because you're passionate about something or it's your heart's work, doesn't mean that you're not along the way erasing your own humanity while centering everyone else's.
Right.
And so that is something that I'm constantly talking to my staff about. They're all much younger than me. And, I have those conversations with them often and have really sought to create an environment where people can be transparent about what they need. I have unlimited personal time off with no questions. Because I want to support people in their mental health. I have aides who have said they can't take a meeting because they have a therapy appointment. So we've created a very welcoming, safe, and transparent environment in that regard, and it is something that I am proud of.
Absolutely. I think the job you and your team do is a very difficult job. So I've heard about how well you treat your employees and how important being trauma informed is to you in your own work and in your own office. So I'm so glad to hear that you're sort of walking the walk, as they say. And Ayanna, we're getting close to the end of our time, although I could talk to you forever. But I'm wondering, do you have some advice for people who are listening about how they can engage with their elected representatives and advocate for mental health or trauma-related issues?
Yes, my advice is that you're an expert. You know, you're an expert in your degrees or in your lived experience, and it matters and it needs to be heard. And just know that there is power in your advocacy. Elected officials, their staff members, themselves do read emails and letters and do keep an accounting of phone calls. And so just know that your voice needs to be heard. It is important, and that you are qualified to make a political contribution simply by way of your own lived experience. And to please continue to raise your voice, even when you can feel like you're screaming into the wind and you worry that it's falling on ears that are resistant to really hear. That actually is not true. That is not true. So please do email your elected officials, call your elected officials, engage with them, with us at town halls or coffees. And it doesn't matter. I wish that everyone was registered to vote or was able to vote, but it doesn't matter if you have voted for that person or not, if you're of voting age or not. We have an accountability to you.
Mm-hmm.
And I really do believe that we do not elect saviors. I'll say that as a voter. We don't
Mm-hmm.
elect saviors, but we do elect partners.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you think about it in that way, part of partnership is accessibility. Part of partnership is accountability. So you needn't shrink or play small or be intimidated by or reluctant to lobby, agitate, demonstrate, demand things of your elected officials.
Yes. Wow. Thank you. That's great advice, because I do think one of the things that can be intimidating is thinking, well, my story isn't big enough. It's not important enough. It doesn't count. My
Right.
voice isn't loud enough because it's just me. I don't have a crowd behind me. So I appreciate you sharing that. And before we go, Ayanna, do you have any final thoughts you want to share with our listeners?
I guess I would just say, especially for those who do this work every day, whether you are a social worker or a therapist or doing something in the mental or behavioral health space, whether you're a first responder or a healthcare professional, and whether you're an OBGYN, I mean, anyone doing the work of healing, to just, you're committed to doing the work of change, but please do hold space for yourself and comparable space to be just as committed to your own radical healing. And in the words of Maya Angelou, your own radical joy. And I'll just close it out by saying, Manya, when I held that listening only hearing on the Boston City Council, which ultimately became the groundwork for my two bills in Congress, counseling, not criminalization, and also the Strong Support for Children Act, I asked the psychologist there, what is the chief combatant to trauma? And their response was to inform joy. So
Wow.
that's my homework for everyone.
Wow. Ayanna, thank you so much for sharing that story and your story of your advocacy work and your policy work. Thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. See you soon.
See ya. Thank you for listening. I hope you got as much out of this conversation as I did. So if you'd like to learn more about me, Manya Chilinsky, I work with organizations to help understand how to create environments where people can thrive after difficult life experiences. And I do this through talks and consulting. I'm a survivor of mass violence, and I use my experience to help leaders learn about resiliency, compassion, and trauma-sensitive leadership, to build strategies to enable teams to thrive and be engaged amidst difficulty and turmoil. If this is something you want to learn more about, visit my website, www.manyachilinsky.com, or email me at manya@manyachilinsky, or stop by my social media on LinkedIn and Twitter. Thanks so much.